The dinner table. Someone says something. Maybe it's about wildfires. Maybe it's about gas prices. And you feel it before you've decided what to do about it. The familiar tightening. Do you say something? Do you let it go again? And if you let it go again, what does that cost you this time? Most people who care about climate have a version of this moment they carry around. A specific person, a specific table, a specific exchange that went wrong or didn't happen at all. And a question underneath it that doesn't fully resolve. Is there any version of this conversation that doesn't end in a fight, a silence, or a feeling of having betrayed either the relationship or yourself? This video is about that question, not the abstract version, the one at your actual table, with your actual people. Here is what this video will give you: a reframe of what these conversations are actually about, and 3 specific, research-grounded approaches that make it possible to be in that room, holding your values, without blowing up the dinner or swallowing yourself completely. The goal is not to convert anyone by dessert. The goal is to leave the table with the relationship still there and your own sense of integrity intact. Those are achievable. Let's get there carefully. Here is the diagnosis most people are operating from when they walk into a climate conversation with a skeptic. I need to make a better argument, more data, cleaner framing, a statistic they can't dismiss. If the last conversation failed, it was because the evidence wasn't compelling enough. So this time, bring more of it. That diagnosis feels logical. It is also almost entirely wrong. And the reason it keeps producing the same result is not that the argument needs to be sharper. It's that the argument is the wrong tool for the actual situation. Here is the most honest thing that can be said about why these conversations fail. The most sophisticated climate communicator in the world cannot win an argument that no one is actually having. What does that mean in practice? There is a body of research developed over about 2 decades in political psychology and communication science that keeps finding the same uncomfortable thing. When a belief is tied to someone's sense of group identity, better information does not update it. It hardens it. The psychologist Dan Kahan called this identity protective cognition. The basic finding: when people feel that accepting new information would require them to become a different kind of person, or to break with their community, they process that information defensively, not openly. More data activates the defense. It does not dissolve it. This is not a finding about stupidity or bad faith. It is a finding about how human beings actually work when the stakes are social, not just factual. And climate, in a lot of American families and a lot of workplaces, is not primarily a factual question anymore. It is a social one. It is a question about which team you're on, what you think counts as a serious problem, and whether the people across the table from you are going to keep respecting you after this conversation ends. Which means, if you walk in trying to win a factual debate, you are playing a game the other person isn't playing. And that mismatch, not your argument, not their stubbornness, is why the conversation keeps producing the same result. The diagnosis isn't bad argument. The diagnosis is wrong game. So what is the conversation actually about? If it isn't primarily about facts, what is it about? It is about identity and belonging, and who gets to decide what counts as real and what counts as serious. It is about whether the person across from you feels seen and respected by you, or feels like they are being corrected and found wanting. And this is the part that costs something to sit with. It is also about you. About whether you can be in that room without needing the other person to agree with you in order to feel like you held your ground. Here is a question worth sitting with before the next conversation. What if changing their mind by the end of dinner is simply not the timescale this works on? Not as resignation, as strategy. The research on how people actually update deeply held beliefs is pretty consistent on one thing. It almost never happens in a single confrontation. It happens over time, through repeated low-stakes exposure, through relationships where they feel trusted rather than targeted, through conversations where they weren't required to lose face in order to consider something new. That is the actual mechanism. Which means the dinner table conversation, if it goes well, is not the place the belief changes. It is one small moment in a much longer process that only continues if the relationship survives the dinner. Jeffrey Cohen's work on values affirmation points to something directly relevant here. People are significantly more open to information that challenges their existing view when they first feel affirmed in something that matters to them, when they don't experience the conversation as an attack on who they are. That is not manipulation. That is understanding how human beings process things that feel threatening to their sense of self. What working actually means in a climate conversation with a skeptic is not, they agree with me before I leave. It is, the relationship is still a channel. The door did not close. The next conversation is still possible. That reframe is not a lowering of the bar. It is an honest reading of how change actually moves through relationships and through people. So, what do you actually do? 3 approaches. Not a script, not a debate playbook. A set of orientations that change what happens in the room. The first, separate the relationship from the argument. This one sounds obvious. It is much harder in practice than it sounds, because when someone dismisses something you care about deeply, the relationship and the argument become very difficult to hold separately. But here's what it looks like behaviorally. You make it clear, through your tone, your body language, your willingness to talk about something else, your genuine interest in the person beyond this topic, that the relationship is not contingent on agreement, that you are not withdrawing warmth in proportion to their resistance, that you are not treating their skepticism as a moral verdict on them. That does not mean you pretend to agree. It means you demonstrate, through behavior rather than declaration, that disagreement on this does not end the relationship. When that is genuinely communicated, the other person's defenses have less to protect. And that is when, slowly, over time, things sometimes shift. The second, ask rather than argue. There is a specific kind of question that does something a statement cannot. It invites the other person into their own reasoning without requiring them to defend a position they've publicly staked. Not, don't you think the data on this is pretty clear? That's an argument wearing a question mark. Something more like, what would it take for you to take this seriously? Or, is there any version of this that concerns you? Or, simply, where does that come from for you? These questions do not win the argument. They open a door that a statement would have closed. They also give you real information about what is actually underneath the resistance, which is almost always something more specific and personal than a general skepticism about climate science. Motivational interviewing, a communication framework developed in clinical psychology, has shown consistently that people talk themselves into change more readily than they are argued into it. The question creates the space for that. The statement eliminates it. The third, decide what you actually want before you open your mouth. This is the one most people skip, and it is probably the most important. Before the next climate conversation with a skeptic, name your actual goal. Not the abstract goal, the specific one, for this conversation, with this person, tonight. Is it, I want them to acknowledge that climate change is real? Is it, I want them to understand why I care so much about this? Is it, I want to say one true thing without having to take it back later? Is it, I want to get through dinner without this becoming a fight? All of those are legitimate. They are also completely different conversations. And walking in without knowing which one you're having is why you often end up in none of them. You cannot control what they believe. You can control what you're trying to accomplish. And those two things, kept separate, make the conversation survivable in a way that collapsing them never has. If the framework in this video is one you want to go deeper on, there's a resource in the description that takes it further. It includes specific conversation scripts, language for different relationships, and a structured approach for the situations this video named but didn't have time to fully walk through. Not a replacement for what's here, an extension of it. Link in the description and in the pinned comment. Here is what this looks like in practice before the next conversation you've been dreading. One thing, not a list. One thing, done with intention, is worth more than a dozen strategies deployed in a panic. Before you walk into the room, write down, actually write, not just think, what you want to leave the table having done. Not what you want them to believe, what you want to have done. There is a real difference between those two. One is inside your control, one is not. And the entire experience of the conversation shifts when you orient toward the thing you can actually affect. Maybe what you want is to say one true thing without apologizing for it. Maybe it's to ask one genuine question and actually listen to the answer. Maybe it's to stay warm toward the person even when you disagree with everything they say. Now, the objection that belongs in this video, but the person I'm dealing with isn't operating in good faith. They're not actually open to anything. So what's the point of any of this? That objection is sometimes entirely accurate. And this video would be dishonest if it didn't say so. Some relationships at this moment in time do not have a productive channel for this conversation. The resistance is too deeply fused with identity, the dynamic too charged, the history too specific. And knowing how to read that, how to give yourself permission to stop trying to force a conversation through a door that isn't open, is also part of the framework. Not every silence is a failure. Some silences are accurate readings of what is actually possible between two specific people right now. Protecting the relationship sometimes means not having the conversation tonight. Protecting yourself sometimes means deciding that your peace is not a fair trade for a conversation that will cost you something and produce nothing real on the other side. That is not giving up. That is knowing what you're doing and why. The goal, to stay clear about it, is not conversion and it is not silence. It is finding the specific version of the conversation that keeps the relationship as a channel, leaves you intact, and plants something, a question, a moment of genuine contact that might, over time, matter. That is a longer game than winning dinner. It is also the only game that actually works. If you want the full framework, with specific scripts for specific relationships and language for the moments this video named but couldn't fully map, it's in the description. That's where to go next. What's the climate conversation you keep almost having, but don't? What stops you? So here is where we actually are. The conversation you've been dreading is not primarily a debate about facts. It is a navigation problem, a relational one, with a communication strategy inside it. And the reason it keeps failing is not that your argument needs to be better. It is that you have been trying to win a game the other person isn't playing. The honest version of what's possible in that room. You cannot change what they believe tonight. You can change what you're trying to accomplish. You can separate the relationship from the argument, so the relationship survives as a channel, even when the argument goes nowhere. You can ask instead of argue and give the other person space to hear themselves think instead of a position to defend. And you can decide before you walk in what you actually want to leave with, so you are navigating towards something real instead of running from something feared. None of that is surrender. None of it requires you to pretend the problem isn't serious or to perform agreement you don't feel. It requires something more specific than that. The willingness to play the longer game. To treat the relationship as the ground the change moves through, not the obstacle in front of it. You are not responsible for what they believe. You are not going to save the planet by winning Thanksgiving. What you are responsible for is how you show up. Whether you stayed honest without being cruel, whether you kept the door open when you could have slammed it, whether you left the table as someone the other person might someday be willing to hear something new from. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, the most strategically sound thing a person in your position can do. You are imperfect and coherent. You care about something that costs you something to carry. That cost gets named. And the next conversation. Whenever it comes, you will go into it knowing what you're actually doing. That changes things. Not everything, but enough to matter.